All right. Welcome everybody to this virtual coffee lunch and learn. We are very happy to be here today. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. So you can always find out more about us on our site at virtualcoffee.io. We are very excited to have everyone here with us today. And I especially want to thank our presenter, Brian Douglas. He is the founder and CEO of OpenSauce, where he works on increasing the knowledge and insights of open source communities. And in the past, Brian has led the developer advocacy at GitHub and has fostered a community of early adopters through conversations with top open source maintainers on GitHub. And we're especially happy because we're about to kick off Hacktoberfest season. So right now we're talking Preptember, helping our maintainers get their repositories ready for Hacktoberfest and helping contributors learn how to navigate through that process before we do our big kickoff on October 1st. And actually Hacktoberfest released their link to how to participate. I'm going to put that in the chat right now. So if you're new to Hacktoberfest, definitely check that out. And I am going to hand it over to Brian.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for the invite. Big fan of what you've been doing with Virtual Coffee. I've mentioned this a couple times to you on calls, but yeah, happy to finally attend and present as well. So I'm going to give a quick intro, like who I am and background, and then talk about my sort of connection to open source. And then we have the full hour, right? So, okay, that's good context. So let me share my screen because this I like the fact that GitHub has so graciously given me an article to share for my origin story. I actually started coding back in I actually started coding like high school, even middle school to be honest, but never knew I could take it seriously. Didn't know it's like an opportunity for a career or anything like that. MySpace is really where I got my teeth cut on doing CSS and like animating my profile on myspace.com, which is part of the reason why my GitHub profile is a MySpace page as well. Whole nother story, Dev2 post on that. But 2013, I was doing sales. I graduated 2008 with a finance degree during the real recession. I have a finance degree. We're not in a recession right now, technically. So I just want to point that out. Unemployment's pretty low. So it's still hard to get a job, first job, but just want to say that we're not in a recession. Lived through that. I did sales for about 4 years, mainly as a necessity, just needed a job. Also, I was extremely introverted, did not know how to talk to people, wanted to like gain that skill set. So sales was like the way to do that. So did IT sales, got promoted twice in 2 years, and then expected my kid, my oldest, who's now 9. He was born 11 weeks early. And during those 11 weeks, we were in the hospital. And I found out in sales, you're only as good as your last quarter. And I never had a bad quarter until that month. And then at that point, I was like, you know what? No one really cares about sales or what happens outside of like your desk. I want to get a new job. So I actually had an idea for an app. And this app idea was to find churches. It was like Yelp for churches. And the reason I was finding this app because we were in the hospital, we didn't know what was going to happen with our kid. Wanted some sort of like uplifting. We were 20 miles from our house, 25 miles from our house. So it's like, let's try to find a church. Could not Google a church in 2013. There's like a services now. But that was my idea. And I Googled how to make apps. Wanted to make an iPhone app. Found Ruby on Rails eventually because I found out it's easier to do web apps than iOS apps. Built that app in about 17 weeks. So it wasn't like overnight, but I learned and built an app and then got a job. So that's like the cliff notes of what this story is. So feel free to check it out. I have a Code Newbie podcast, is episode number 2. I recorded back in 2013. Saran and I learned code around the same time. So there's a way more detailed conversation and story about that. But during that time, I actually got my first job in Orlando, and I had an idea. I actually, through Saran, actually connected to a community. I was running a community called Ruby Newbies, and very similar to Code Newbies, but specific to Ruby. And I got connected with folks who wanted to build a community for underrepresented folks in tech. It was called Steamroll. And the idea was to build a Slack. Back in the day, Slack was extremely cool. And we had an automation system to invite people into the Slack group, because at the time you could not auto invite people to Slack. You had to manually add their email. So I figured out how to do this in Node.js. I had never written Node.js before. I knew JavaScript, but I didn't know how server-side JavaScript. So like actually getting servers to run and doing next level ES6 looking things, did not know any of that stuff. So found an open source project, and that open source project had a maintainer with like no contribution. It was like one contribution, and it happened to like do everything I needed to do. Could not get to work, so I reached out to them directly, and to my surprise, they responded back to me within hours. It was like late Saturday night, and was able to fix and make this work by Monday morning. So that was like my first real interaction with open source. And what I found out really quickly is that if you bring like the right questions, or if you bring like the right interest, like maintainers are always willing to mentor you. And it's like free mentorship. Like people pay for boot camps, like $20,000, whatever it is. But you can get free mentorship. It's the approach and the execution that is the challenge. And like if everybody in this room went to my project and said, "Hey, I want to be mentored in open source," like, maybe I could connect you with somebody else in the community, and then you can up level that, because I don't have the bandwidth to mentor 15 people or 20 people, whoever, how many people were alive in this, or 11. There's a number right there. So I don't have the bandwidth. But if you open up an issue with like, I tried this, I tried that, I tried this, and I can be like, oh, you know what? It's actually this. Here's the answer. Then I'm able to like unblock you really quickly without missing a beat in my day-to-day work. And I think that's a lot of stuff, like when walking into open source, like having that sort of approach of like, I don't want to take away too much bandwidth, so I'll give you enough information up front. And the same thing if you're looking for a mentor. I actually run a podcast. So I have a podcast on the YouTube channel. It's like a weird flex, but it's my stage. So here we are. But Chad, who's actually, Chad's been in some of these before in the past. He's actually full-time engineering with me for open source. I found Chad through open source. Actually, I found him on Twitter, and then I pitched him as he was looking for his job last year. Hey, why don't you make a contribution to open source? I've got some stuff I could use. So I basically said, hey, and we're all friends here, so I'll basically tell you how much I paid him. I paid him $200 to solve one problem. And the one problem that we needed solved is that we just needed the storybook to be connected to our existing components. Very menial work. It's like stuff that I could do with my eyes closed, but I didn't have bandwidth to do it. So I'm like, hey, I've got a very clearly scoped work. Why don't you do this? And then use this to leverage to find your next job or whatnot. He ended up doing that in like very quickly, like in a couple of days. And ended up finding a job pretty shortly after that, which is pretty awesome. I convinced him to leave that job to join me full time, so which is also awesome. So he's now indebted to me. But what I'm getting at is that we had this conversation called finding mentors, or it's Twitter Space, and finding mentors to mentor you. And it's like when I learned how to do sales, like sales is all about like getting the person in the place where they want to buy. So if you get the person in the place where they want to mentor you, it's like a very similar tactic. It sounds slimy, I guess, when you apply sales to it, but it's essentially that. Like if someone DMs me on Twitter and says hi, like it's an automatic no response, because I don't want to say hi back. I don't want to go back and forth and like figure out what you're looking for. A lot of times people give me paragraphs of text with like their story, but no call to action. So like I don't want to be rude, so I just don't respond. I want to say cool story, bro, but I don't want to respond to be rude. I respect the fact that they shared that, but it's hard to engage knowing that there's like really no end goal here. But if someone responds and says, hey, I've been learning how to code for 6 months at a boot camp, really interested in JavaScript, leveling up in React, curious if you had any like links that you could help, that would help to like unblock. Or a couple times in my DMs, people actually DM me and said like, hey, I want to get involved in open source. Do you know any good projects to get started? And what's great is like, I have a good project to get started, and it's called hotopenSauce.pizza. And so this is a project that the sort of story, like I'll get into like good first repos and issues and stuff like that, and that concept in a moment. But this, and like, I didn't prepare any slides because I was just going to go Google tabs this whole time. Back in December of 2021, I had this idea that I wanted to use Astro. Astro is like a new builder static site generator for websites. And I've been sitting on this API, which this API is like completely revamped as of recent. It was very, very rudimentary. But what we've been doing is we've been using GitHub Actions to index open source repos, to identify open source repos to contribute to. Like a bit of oh, sorry, I probably should have wrote some notes to know which way I'm going with this conversation. But the original open source project is this. I built this like about back in 2016. And the only reason again, I built the church app. It was called Choich, CHUYCH. We put the Y in church was the tagline. I love marketing and I love using words. So I built open source as a way for me to track open source contributions. So like this is my CRM for me tracking and stalking open source projects. So rather than doing what most people do is which like just jump into a Discord and say, hey, I'm ready to work. Point me in the right direction. I do a lot more stalking and prep before I even like say hello the first time. So identifying just like who are the main contributors for the project, who to reach out to. Here are my contributors. Here are my good first issues right here. And this is like this, this tinkering around side project, working on this on the side while having a day job. And this is what we got. And a lot of this is open source contribution as well. So this is what we had. We had just basically a way to track and stalk projects. And then last summer, or actually last October, we came up with this feature, which is the recommendation feature. So like my idea was like, and I wrote a whole issue and discussion about like, I was really into TikTok. So I wanted to build an algorithm to recommend projects to contribute to similar to TikTok. So like I eventually will make an iOS app, mainly because I only know iOS, but probably will use like a Flutter or a React Native to do Android. But I just want to swipe on my phone and find cool projects to work on. What's funny enough is like GitHub actually has a feature like this in the GitHub app. It's not that great. And I pitched this internally. Mind you, I don't work at GitHub anymore. A lot of people might know me from GitHub. I actually, my last official day was yesterday. So I'm 100% full-time working on open source. But while at GitHub, I pitched this idea internally a few times. And we even like shipped this feature after lots of talks with the PM of this little For You page, which had a lot of pushback because using the title For You is very TikTok-esque. But I literally sat with the PM last summer and was like, we got to do a For You thing. Like we got to recommend. The execution's really not there, to be quite honest. Hopefully it gets improved. But there's a very similar feature on the mobile app as well, where you can sort of search projects. I don't want to dog GitHub. GitHub's a great product and a great platform. There's just some missing pieces that we're going to hopefully do better on. But going back to this, so last summer, while we were building all this other stuff at GitHub, I was building this and I had an API and algorithm to basically identify projects for you to go contribute to. The way the algorithm works, it's based on your stars. So we look at your last 30 stars, and then we check with the other, at this point, this is a cool little feature. This is 100% copied GitHub on this one. If I hit the tab, if I hit the back tick, I can see a staff bar. So if you're a GitHub employee, you see a staff bar. So out of our 882 users for open source, specifically for this platform, if Becca and I start the same repo, it gets a boost, just like TikTok. So we both watch the same video, it gets boosted in the algorithm. So the way to identify good projects to contribute to is we're actually checking user contributions in stars, and it's part of our, when you log in, we do call this out. So we want to be very clear that this is what we're doing. We're not trying to sell this information to marketers and stuff like that. It's really just to recommend contributing. Spent a lot of time trying to think about how to do this properly without rubbing people the wrong way. So I think we're there. Anyway, built this little feature, and this feature became like this whole other, I went down this weird path of like, we need to actually build a whole site for this and like build more interactions and admin dashboard. And that's basically what hotopenSauce.pizza is that small little feature became a whole nother project. So now you could, which I fixed this yesterday and then it broke. So it actually is not working, but I do have a PR, a deploy preview I can show actually of it working. I prepared for this and then I saw that it was like I guess what I would call the white screen of death. Stuff was just not rendering in React. But it's fixed, it's just not ready to go live. But what I did want to show you is like you could see the most popular discussed projects. So it's sorted by issues. It's sorted by voted as well. So the highly voted projects, we've had to like delete votes multiple times because we've been testing this product. So like FreeCodeCamp probably deserves way more way more upvotes, but it only has 4 because we deleted the database a few times. But we hope to go public with this next month in like a bigger way to get more votes and more activity. This is kind of like the product hunt for open source is like what we're kind of focusing on. But eventually this will be the place that we surface good first repos. And the reason why I say good first repos is I think there's like when you sort this by stars, which is this, a lot of folks when first time contributing, especially at Hacktoberfest, you go into a place where like, oh, I'm going to find projects in my packets.json and go contribute there. And like, that was very, like that was a way to make contributions like 5 years ago. The challenge is that these projects have got to the place where there's so much tech debt and they've like survived for so long that it's very hard to jump in. So my recommendation is like, look for good first repos rather than just any repo. So when you think of things like Vue has a very extensive ecosystem of Vue templates and examples. Like that's a better place to get started than Vue.js itself or like React. Like I would recommend React Query over React because it's not the same Facebook project, but React Query is a way to fetch and consume data and cache data like naturally that needs tons of help. But everyone's so focused on contributing to React that you get lost in the sauce. And that's the whole other etymology of why open source has a name is that if you don't got sauce, then you're lost. And so what I'm getting at is like, we want to start surfacing, like I had a long conversation with Henry Zhu from Babel, and Babel, for good or for worse, like Babel's gotten to like the mature phase of the ecosystem. Webpack, same thing, where it needs less contribution. This needs way more like hyper-focused contributions. So these are like, if you work full time on a plugin or ecosystem project that uses Webpack heavily, like a framework, then those are people who need to contribute to Webpack. But like where Webpack needs contribution in is ecosystem community contribution in that way. And like one of my earliest contributors, AJC Web Dev, Anthony Campolo, he does a really good job. And this is the other thing that we want to also encourage on the platform is he does a good job of just doing intro tutorials on new frameworks and technologies. And that's like something that every framework, I'm talking to actually a founder of a company, and they have actually, I'll call them out. Like, so Fig is a cool CLI tool. Highly recommend checking it out. It actually is, why am I doing Astro? I meant to do Fig. There we go. Also the whole with name, I think it's catching up. So Fig has this whole ecosystem that's open source, which is their extensions. So if you have a CLI tool that wants to integrate with Fig, there's a platform for that, which is extensions. And what Fig needs is way more people to contribute extensions. Same thing with like Airbyte. Airbyte is an open source, like huge company at this point, but they have a lot of open source technologies integrated in Airbyte. And what they need contribution is more integrations into Airbyte. And the reason for that is like, once you have people who could use their technology with like Facebook or whatever these other icons are, Salesforce, like now they can serve more customers and more users and grow more ecosystem by building a small little plugin to integrate WhatsApp into Airbyte, which like I guarantee, like actually WhatsApp might be there, but like think of like something brand new. Like there's all this brand new stuff that comes out that people haven't built integrations for. And it's up to us, people who want to contribute open source. I think Discord's a good example where there's like tons of services that they can send messages to Slack, but they don't send them to Discord. And there's like no easy way to do that unless you write your own custom configuration. And if someone out there made a Discord integration, which exists for Airbyte, like that becomes now a thing that you can maintain and manage. But in the other vein is like, you don't have to build it from scratch because a lot of these integrations exist, but no one is there to support it. So Orbit is another good example too as well. They have a very new in their plugin ecosystem, but the way to contribute Orbit data, and sorry if I'm going, feel free to like stop me and I'm mentioning a bunch of stuff with no context. These are just products. Like there's no reason to really dive deep. Products that use open source pretty heavily. Orbit's integration to add YouTube data onto their platform is a GitHub action. So I mentioned that because if you know GitHub Actions, you can go contribute to that YouTube integration. And then what usually happens is, and this is a bit of secret sauce as well, you contribute to a company's open source project that's not critical path. it's a really, really good gateway drug to get an interview to get a job. So like Electron is a good example as well. So Electron no longer, it's now managed by the JS Foundation. When I joined GitHub in 2018, it was managed by GitHub. Like Electron was created by GitHub to build Atom. So it was previously called Atom Shell. They basically took the technology that made Atom Shell and then made it usable for everyone. And then the entire world built Electron apps. So there's a engineer at GitHub who is now just promoted to staff engineer. So within like 5 years, he's promoted quite a few times. His introduction into open source into GitHub was contributions to Electron. So like when it always happens, like someone's looking for a specialized skill or talent, looking to recruit it, best thing they can do is go into open source projects and find out people who are doing really good work and reach out to them. The challenge is the majority of people are doing that are the people with a ton of free time and bandwidth to like spend all day, every day in Electron or in other open source projects. So like there is a bit of a disjointed, open source is not equitable, tech is not equitable. And I think the quicker we like basically just admit that fact, the easier it is to a path where it can be equitable. So for that reason, like I would love to make it way more equitable and like encourage people to do open source contributions at work. Because I think that's a valid path for people to level up and gain skills. The challenge is if I'm a manager of a company and I don't want my employees leaving to another jobs, I'm not going to encourage people to do open source on work. But the validation of like, there's a lot of benefits. So I don't know if anyone's an engineering manager in this call, but I can tell you the benefits of letting your employees do this, because validating your product and your team by having people do that open source, it makes it easier for recruiting other people. So not just losing folks, but anyway, I divulge, I'm divulging right from the point. So hot open sauce.pizza, it exists. Actually, some folks on the call have actually contributed to the project as well, and even have an open PR right now, which is pretty amazing. So I wanted to actually talk about good first issues, and then I talked about good first repos. These are repos that are approachable, usually extension libraries, up and coming projects, as well as a good first issue, a good first repo to actually work with. And then again, the UI is broken live, but this deploy preview has the most recent project. So
can we pause for a second, Brian?
Oh, yeah,
We've got
please.
a question in the chat. Yearn says, it sounds very much like doing open source for the sake of doing open source work. I've only worked on repos that I've actually used. Is this idea more to get you to learn more new things by doing something in open source?
Yeah. Is this idea more to get to learn new things by doing open source? Yes. So there's like this notion of like, back in the day when I was a junior dev, we called it resume driven development. So back in 2014, I got put on a React project and it completely changed my entire career. So like once I learned React, before everyone knew React, I could get any job I wanted. I got the job I got next because of that one experience. But the challenge is like introducing new technologies and new systems into your day-to-day work. It's challenging because you need to get buy-in from other places. So my recommendation is go do open source. So like if you want to learn Vue, but your company's doing React, go find a React or Vue example and then like help polish it or help write tests for it or help improve the CSS experience. Like do something to like expose yourself into a new technology. So that way you can bring that either back to work or into your next interview. So there's that, but like, I think there's also the other notion of like, you kind of have to know what you want to get out of open source as well. It's the same thing as like, you have to know what you want to get out of if you're going to open source a project. So if you're open sourcing a project just for fame and notoriety, like probably not going to happen unless you have some other ecosystem to drive stars. But like in contribution, like when you walk into a project, like knowing that you want to learn how to contribute, that's what you get out of open source. So if you contribute to any open source project, we have so many actions and automation and tooling and contributors that will help you push you to the right direction to know how to interact with maintainers. So my goal for open source, the open source side, is that we can level you up enough that you can go contribute somewhere else. We would love to keep you around forever and contribute like to a bunch of stuff, but the reality is like hot open sauce.pizza, eventually we're gonna get tired of it. We're gonna start another project and we'll spin up another thing. Like I'm working on a project right now, which I'll share at the end. That's I'm gonna open source and it's gonna be pretty nifty. It's gonna have a lot of contribution, and then in 6 months I'll get tired of it and I'll move on to the next thing. So hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. Yearn says resume driven development is a great way to put it. And I know Lucy has got a question too.
It was more of a comment, but with the thing about contributing to open source at work, I've done it more than once where I had to contribute an open source to make an integration with the product that we were working on at work. So
Yeah.
that's something that managers can appreciate,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a two-edged sword that way, where sometimes, while you're contributing open source at work, it's actually helpful to the whole team.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I appreciate folks like you who do that too as well, because the a lot of people will make assumptions of like, oh man, this thing didn't work for me, so let's delete it and rip it out the project and like move on with the next. Or you found a bug upstream in an open source project you're counting on. Most people will just like move off or like find something better and spend time researching for better things. Very few people open the issue. Like full-time developers, it's hard to get them just to open the issue and tell the maintainer something's broken, let alone get them to actually fix it and make it work with their product or their integration. So like that is like such a great way to like get your teeth cut on open source, like outside of just like the starter introduction project. And then the other thing that I've been mentioning, and I did with Chad as well and some other folks, is like take your PR, which is open and public, and add it to your cover letter, add it to your projects you worked on in your resume. Because if someone could say, oh, wow, this person actually has like legit contributions, they've worked with a team. And then the challenge that I wanted to solve is like bootcamp grads, you have real life work experience. You just have a bunch of like greenfield apps. Open source contributions becomes, oh, wow, you made a contribution to a project that has actual users. And like it shows that you can communicate with the team, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's valuable stuff that you can't make up, basically. Like I push for a bunch of boot camps to add open source curriculum to their boot camp curriculum back in like 2019. Some took it, some didn't, some passed. But what I'm getting at is like this is such a great opportunity to like get on the job experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would have been a fantastic way to learn and grow in boot camp.
Cool. Yeah, and I already lost a tangent that was on before the questions. But anyway, if anyone has any other questions, like we're halfway through, so like I'm happy to like this is your time. So hopefully anybody, if you want to get value from me or value out of this, like definitely ask more questions. Anybody remember what I was talking about before the pause?
I have a hard enough time keeping track of my own tangents.
Excellent. Yeah. I actually I used to so I learned through a boot camp. And so the boot camp was called Block. At the time when I went through the program, it wasn't actually a boot camp. It was like a mentorship program where I had a mentor me one-to-one. Greatest experience. Obviously doesn't scale because it's not around anymore. But I was happy to go through that because I got probably the best educated experience of how to build stuff in the best way. In my opinion, obviously learn the way you know how to learn. But what I was getting at is that when I got hired by that same boot camp, it was like my second job as an engineer. And before I left, I started mentoring in the open source curriculum. So we created an open source curriculum. And like a lot of this, like my sort of history and why I'm doing this is from that one experience. Like I learned how to do open source. I leveled up my career. I grew into learning React through open source as well. And then I started teaching other bootcamp students. It was like the capstone. They could either build like a capstone project or we can go contribute to open source. And I was getting people to contribute to like Angular and Golang, some Go libraries and stuff like that back in like 2017. And we were just getting contributions from like brand new like engineers. And it was like some of those folks are like they're set up for like success in their career like forever from that one experience. And not to like toot my own horn, but like that is also why it was around the same time I started building open source. And a lot of the folks that I was mentoring were also contributing to open source, the original platform with me back in the day. And it's some of them I still keep in touch with and like chat every now and then. And it's an amazing experience. It's almost like the one analogy that I use a lot is if you were going to go into the NBA, like if your goal was to go play in the National Basketball Association, and you found out through Twitter that LeBron James is doing pickup games outside your house, would you go play pickup? Would you at least go watch? Like, and the answer is like 100% yes. Like if your goal is to get the NBA and an NBA star is playing in front of you or inviting you to play with them, that is open source. So, and again, like you don't know who these folks are. You don't know where the mentorship's going to come from. But I did DevRel at GitHub. I did DevRel at Netlify as well. I live by the motto in developer relations that you have to be in the right place at the right time all the time. And the only way to do that is just by being places. So like by sitting here and listening to me, like whether you knew who I was prior or you don't follow me, it doesn't matter. Like now you're aware of the work I'm doing. And now you're aware of like the work that I'm like leading towards. If you wanted to, you could skate directly where the puck is going. Sorry with all these sports analogies, but like hockey, you could be right where this entire industry is going. And like there's a trend right now. If you go to so one of the YC, I don't know what they call these partners. I don't know how to, you could see like the previous YC companies startup directory. Cool. So if you look at like, I forget how I did this, but anyway, if you go into like the last batch, and like this all started in 2020, there's a trend of projects that are companies that are open source first. So if you think like companies like Superbase is open source first. They have an open source Firebase alternative. Medusa, open source Shopify. PostHog, open source Amplitude, and Google Analytics. So like there's all these open source companies that are building on, like a lot of folks are just building open source projects for fun on the side. And what they're doing is they're taking that and building like entire businesses on it. So like even more so, like where this entire industry is going is that open source is cool. It's a really good way to get product market fit really quickly. So like Pyrographs, I bet Ryan's out here in Oakland where I live. This was like a tool they built internally at the last job. And they took that idea and then made an entire company out of it. And they just open source it first, made a company. And now if you want to get a job at Pyrograph, which they're currently not hiring, they're actually doing pretty well with their small team. But when they are hiring, like if you're into Kubernetes and flame graphs and analytics and stuff like that and displaying that data, getting involved in their product by just like building an extension or a plugin or contributing to the main branch, like that's an opportunity that perhaps Pyrograph is not hiring, but like InfoDB, Grafana, like there's like a ton of companies that will use Pyrograph internally, and when they hire they're going to look for the entire ecosystem of Pyrograph and be like, hey, who's actually doing a lot of contribution that's not an employee for Pyrograph? Let's go hire that person.
Yeah, that's great. I know. Okay, so Reynald is reminding us where we were before, 6 months before moving on to the next thing with the soon-to-be open source project. You were talking about that, finding good first repos, and then Lucia has questions whenever you want to open it up again.
Yeah. So real quick on that, 6 months before moving on to the next thing, actually, I didn't know what I was going to even say after. Anyway, it was a good time for questions because I think I was fumbling for the next thing to talk about, but I haven't got to the good first issues thing. So I did want to quickly go into good first issues and talk about that. And I guess I will discover that repo again. I can tell this conversation is great when I got all these tabs. Cool. So good first issues. Now in GitHub, and so there's like the I don't want to like dog anybody who's like currently like encouraging open source contribution, because I think all content is good. Open source at guides, good first issues at dev, like all this content is really good to get started. But like what I'm trying to solve is like then after that point. So like you already know good first issue exists. You already know open source is something you want to do, but there's like almost nothing after you discovered it or even like how to interact with like maintainers. Be nice is a good one. Inside projects, you can go to /contribute, which I swear I can spell. There we go. And we're a little light on good first issues, mainly because like people are just crushing it and cranking through a bunch of stuff. But what I'm getting at is like /contribute is a really good way inside of any GitHub repo to find the stuff that you can contribute on. But my notion about good first issues is that the best good first issues are the ones you open. And the reason for that is because you already found the problem and can actually reproduce that. If I've got some pretty underhand pitched good first issues here, which I guess we did get an assigned. So basically we completely pivoted to what the product of hot open source was. And a lot of the naming structure was like post instead of repo. So the ask is basically rename these files. It's almost too easy. It's almost like it feels like it's a trick that this is a good first issue. It's not a trick. Good first issues are usually meant for maintainers to provide breadcrumbs to get people to join community and join contribution. So you do a couple of these, and then I'm gonna ask like this guy, which I failed to even know how to, Dedi. He's based in Indonesia. He's done a ton of good first issues. He's also done a good second issues and like really legit features so far. Every time he assigns stuff, I just know it's gonna get done. So I guess what I'm getting at is, well, I say that, but 23 days ago, this one was assigned. But anyway, actually, no, he didn't sign it. It looks like this guy signed it. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation around catching up and being communicative about what you're working on. That's why we have a Discord. But what I'm getting at is like all good first issues, to be good first issues, should have an answer in it. So everything in open source that has a good first issue label attached to it automatically has the answer of exactly what you need to do. And the reason for that is not because I'm lazy and don't want to do it. It's because I want to make friends and I want to make new contributors and I want to grow people into open source. So the reason why we don't have a lot of good first issues is because every single one of them, it had legitimately the answer in it. So I'll walk you through one of the closed ones. Options, sans font. Okay, here's a good one. Yeah, so we basically, we had a mismatch in font styles in the upper left and again, like pretty trivial. I could have did this with my eyes closed. I could have did it while watching Bluey with the kids. But what I'm getting at is that I left this here because I want to make a new friend. And then Denny Script took it. The one thing I did want to point out is that we have a GitHub action that in GitHub, if you have an org, you can't assign yourself to an issue. So almost every good first issue has this like weird dance of like, hey, I want to work on this. Can I take it? Or, hey, is this still ready to work on? Or can I work on this? And you'll have like 3 people in a row ask that same question. Because we also have automation to tweet every time we have a good first issue. So automatically people assign themselves pretty quickly. So for that reason, this GitHub action basically just, it takes away that whole song and dance and just assigns that person to the issue. So if you write .take, it watches for that one keyword and assigns Denny to the issue. So we had a back and forth and conversation. Like this is like, a lot of people are kind of like shy around like asking questions in the issue and they want to like DM and do all sorts of stuff. I think it's actually a really good sign to have a really strong conversation happening in the issue, even before it it's worked on. And the reason for that is because this becomes part of your resume, part of your cover letter. It's like, I can work with a team. I can ask good questions. If it's not a good question and you're like, oh, I actually got the answer, just click delete. It's no shade, no shame. But what I'm getting at is we have automation the entire way from the good first issue to the open the PR to like shove you into the right direction. So unfortunately, this was a good one, except the issue itself wasn't linked. And I'll show you what I mean by that, but it's going to take me a second. So whoops, I clicked the wrong link. Okay, so we have automation for releases. So I'm just going to go back and try to find the PR. That's not good. Oh, here you go. Here's the PR. So we ended up linking the PR. So the one thing that we force all contributors to do is link the PR, or sorry, link the issue to the PR. It is actually, we introduced this last year in Hacktoberfest because we get a lot of unsolicited contribution. So the requirement for all PRs that get open is that there's an issue open. And we were sticklers about this during October. So you have to link to issue. If you found the bug, still required to open an issue, even if you open the PR after, like before. And the reason for that is also because our release automation all points to tell the story for our changelog back to the issue and back to the PR. And if none of those exist, and if none of the, if the PR is like, we're actually currently pushing back on PR descriptions as well. A lot of times PR descriptions are pretty underwhelming. And this is your opportunity to shine, to tell us like what you did, what problems you solved, what you got stuck on, because that becomes like a future blog post. So like we will have functionality in open source in the future to force people to write good PRs and then force people to write blog posts for the PRs. It's down the roadmap, but I have the idea and I already have it scoped out. But what I'm getting at is like, we have a PR template, which we stole from dev.to/forum. This PR template, it enforces people to tell us what you did. Because a lot of times if you go into a PR, there's like nothing there. It makes it really hard to merge it because we're like, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know who Denny is. He came through, made the contributions, has moved on since. if there's no description, we have no idea why this exists. Like, please provide screenshots, videos. Like, a lot of people don't have to record your audio, but at least do a screenshot. And then this is something that I don't do a lot of pushback on, but this shows like, if you read down to the bottom and you provide a GIF, I'm like, oh, cool, this person, they're in. This is like a signal for me to know I can invest in this somebody, because not that, and this is, again, tech was unequitable, and we'll get to that question in a sec. I technically, people who look like me, people who like the same stuff as me, they're obviously going to get way more mentorship from me. And it's just like the unfairness of open source and why all CEOs are white men over 6 feet. It's because, and that's actually 80% of all CEOs in US companies are over 6 feet tall and male. And the reason for that is like, they fit a persona. So what I'm getting at is like, unfortunately, people who provide gifts and provide, like, that's a person that speaks to my culture and who I am. So it's just a signal, and it's okay if someone doesn't add it. It's just like a real good signal for me to know, oh, cool, this person knows how to use Giphy. And eventually everyone learns how to use Giphy. They contribute more than one time. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, we have automation, we have a semantic release bot as well, similar like our take action bot that basically tells if your compliance, if your PR is up to par. So like, did you add a good title? Did you link an issue? Did all the build pass or fail? Like that, usually if you completely missed a mark, this action will then tell you, hey, you missed a mark. Here's the things you can fix. This is actually not built by me. I just basically pitched the idea, and one of MT Foley, who I also think also has been one of these in Virtual Coffee, because he had mentioned this as he ended up getting his first React job last year, and he did it on the back of this one GitHub action. Like, this was like when you go into like the interview and they're like, hey, what did you build recently, or what are you most proud of? Like, that was his pitch. He built this action to manage all open source contributions for open source. So I kind of fumbled through that, but anyway, we have tons of examples of good first issues. And like, if you want to go to close PRs or close issues, you can look to the story, you can look to the releases and see how people got to where they are. Another feature, and I want to share what we're building in open source too as well. So I want to leave time for that. Our new product that we haven't shipped yet. But as far as the question moving towards an equitable tech space, Lucia, do you have a question for that?
Yeah. I do have a lot of experience with not feeling the tech persona, right? Like the other day I was in the grocery store just chasing after my toddler, or having a conversation with the cashier. He was a computer science student. I told him I was in software, and he was just like, whoa, I never would have expected that. And it's like, that's very honest. But yeah, that's something I experienced day to day. But what I want to talk about is something that I became very aware of when I started just moving into the tech space. And I was actually I considered myself very privileged in terms of time and finance when I was learning how to code, right?
Yeah.
I had a 2-month-old and I was doing that, but my husband was taking care of her 50% of the time. And then I also, was living on his salary. And there's a lot of people who don't have those kinds of resources when they're trying to learn open source, which takes time away from work, which would affect finances, and then also time away maybe from caregiving responsibilities or other ones. And then there's another kind of inequity that happens in open source that I've noticed, which kind of seems like there's it's more tacit than the other one. I don't see it discussed as much, but it's in terms of connections, which, I think both you and Becca are doing a lot of amazing work to address both of these things. So I'd just be interested to hear some of your thoughts on what we can do as a community to address these sources of inequity. But like when I first jumped on the internet to learn to code, I had no idea who was in open source. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who have a bunch of friends in open source, and that's how they get into it, right? So that's something that's different that I think, like, open source and virtual coffee definitely address. But I'd just be interested to hear your take on those three sources of inequity in open source.
Yeah. The financial thing is it's an obvious one, and it's something that I wish it was easier. Like there are grants and programs and stuff like that I'm not informed on with enough information to tell people how to do it. But yeah, it just comes down to like the financial thing. You have to like set yourself up in a way that you can actually learn and grow. It's the college course, Matt, like if you went to college in the US, you learned about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So like the base layer is like you just want acceptance and actually no, I don't know the base layer, but anyway, like if you don't have food and shelter, like you're not really looking for the next thing. So like you got to get food and shelter first, and then you want acceptance and love. So like you got to have some sort of acceptance and feel like you're empowered to even do anything. So like to have your spouse be able to take your child, and also to have a life outside of work, even that is even like if you don't have that, like if your day to day is like I'm just gonna binge watch Netflix and like go heat up a burrito and stuff like that, which like it's not I'm not like condemning anybody who's that lifestyle, but like if you have no experience, and I think COVID is the same, was like it kind of exposed a lot of this. Like if you were late 20s living alone in your apartment and you had no one to talk to, and like your day to day was just like open up the laptop and either watch Netflix or scroll Twitter, like you got to like expand. We find a community, find a group, and virtual coffee, open source, like those are all avenues to find your community and find a group. So like the one thing I actually want to do is with open source is the idea of a squad. So like we want these the pizza branding is on point because like with agile methodology, like 2 pizza teams is a group big enough that can eat 2 pizzas. So I want to be able to have the idea of a notion of a squad of folks who can work with each other to go contribute together in projects. The open source raid guild is something that small group, it's like 25 folks in a Discord. And what they do is they collectively as 25 folks, they go convert nonprofits from JavaScript to TypeScript, or they go write tests for their projects. Very, very focused work. It's the same thing. It's mundane, but it's mundane with 25 close, well, they're not all close friends, but like people who hang out in Discord together. And like, that's the kind of like camaraderie that needs to be, reproduced. The thing that like most people like, story that I have is when I joined Block, moved to San Francisco. As soon as I got there, I noticed everyone went to the same college. So prior to me joining, every single person went to the University of Illinois. And they went and did CS or some sort of degree there, but they all knew each other because they all went to school together. So like once I realized I'm like, oh, this is how tech works. It's like you just know, you hire your friends. Like I hired people. I hired one of my close friends here in Oakland. He was my first employee, and he's the one that produces all the YouTube videos on open source. So it's the same thing. I'm not any different. I just happened to go to University of Illinois. I just happened to just grab people I know and hang out with here in the Bay Area. So I guess it's like finding that group and then finding that sort of connection. I think with like gaming and cooking and all these other like avenues and ecosystems to find like your squad, like that's helpful. And I think it's very important, like especially if maybe you're a passive participant in virtual coffee, like being active and finding a squad is going to make your life so much easier, because when it's like, hey, I got laid off, I need a new job. What jobs are out there? And it's like, oh, I know you, I trust you. Let me introduce you to XYZ or so-and-so. And like my older brother just recently just got a job as a designer after 7 months of not working and just doing contract work. And he got that job because I introduced him to somebody I knew and was like, hey, again, like blood relationship, it's a little different, but what I'm getting at is like, he's part of my squad. He's part of the person that I trust, and I would bend over backwards to do that. And in the end of the day, it's just like, you got to find community and people to sort of work alongside with. Because the other thing, like I mentioned Saran in passing, like Saran, the founders of Dev2, like all these folks that are leading companies and doing big and great things are all people who learned how to code at the same time I did. So like there's a cohort of people who are now like senior managers, directors, CEOs that learned how to code 10 years ago when I did. And now we're all growing up together. We're now basically scratching each other's backs. And I can't understate how valuable this community is, because this community in 10 years, the group that you know from this community will be the reason why your next thing is successful or your next job is available. It's the same thing like college, like you get your MBA. It's the fraternity, sorority, whatever it is, the group that grows up together and like sort of like their tribe. It's the same thing. Like when I joined, I've just recently left GitHub, but there's so many people who left GitHub who we're still in touch and like helping each other out and finding deals and opportunity. It's not an official cohort, but like we just happen to have like we're in each other's DMs all the time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I think it's important to get the word out about finding community, right? Because I didn't have like any friends in tech before I started learning to code. And then I realized I needed to find that because I had transferred between fields before, right? And I realized that it's the connections that are important, but boot camps are going to tell people go mass apply on LinkedIn, right? And that's when you hear those horror stories about people, applying to 3,000 jobs and getting like 20 interviews, which is a way to do it, right? It's a way to do it. It's more work. And since I've built up my connections, I think I did like 2 or 3 coffee chats a week when I was in boot camp, which is a lot, but
it probably sets you
got
up
me
for
like a
success.
50% response rate on my applications, right? Because I would prioritize those. So that's important.
Yeah, it's the and this is like a weird flex, but like boot camp grad myself, I've actually never applied to a job and got it. Every job I've gotten has been a reach out directly to me. And then I said, oh, cool, I'll interview, or cool, I'll take the job. It's like either one of those situations. And it was mainly because I was just involved in community code newbie. I was active on Twitter. I wrote a blog post, started a podcast, which again, like not everyone has to do all those things. I just have to be a weird person who likes to do a lot of stuff at the same time. I'm like fueled by that. Like my wife will tell you I've got way too many hobbies as well. And I'm just energized by just trying new things out all the time. I shared my screen and I'm showing this page because this is like very similar as well. Like I was just whoever showed up first, I was going to talk about them and why I follow them and why they're on my page. So like Schickling, Johannes, he's a co-founder of Prisma. I met him before Prisma was Prisma, just randomly. He happened to start a whole other company. It was sold to some company. And then he was starting a new thing. And it was like this GraphQL like startup. And I was like, oh, cool. I learned GraphQL. My GraphQL project was open sourced. So the very first like technology I embedded to consume GitHub's GraphQL API was GraphCool, which predates. It's a product before Prisma. And then every time, because I was such a power user for GraphCool, when GraphCool pivoted into Prisma, I had dinner in San Francisco. It's like, again, a weird flex, but I had dinner with Johannes. He's like, hey, I'm switching the product. Like, would you be willing to like move open source to it? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. It's called Prisma. Like we figured this is a better idea. So like, oh, cool. So I was able to learn Prisma. He's been on my podcast 3 once whenever he's in, like once a year we get together and then chat. But like Johannes is a big deal. Like I just happened to meet him randomly. And like, I don't even remember where I met him, to be honest. He was introduced to me from somebody else. But like, he's such an impactful person in the industry. And he grew to like what he is today, that this is like opportunity, like become friends, help out each other. Scratch each other's backs, because like you don't know, not that you have to get something from the relationship, but you just don't know where you could be helpful and where they can help you whenever you need that next job or whatever. So we only have 5 minutes. I really wanted to quickly just talk about my new thing that we're doing. You had mentioned Hacktoberfest. We're actually, so I've spent the last 3 months working on this thing with a group of engineers. Ooh, caching is a pain. All right, we're gonna go to beta. Cool, images work here. Wow, anyway, we'll have to fix that later. But we're actually partnering with DigitalOcean to provide insights on Hacktoberfest. So the thing that I discovered is that it's easy to say, go do good first issues. And it's also easy to find good first repos once you know what to look for. But the challenge is once you find that repo, those maintainers, those companies, they don't know how to onboard new contributors. So what we've done is we stepped all the way into solving my problems to now I want to solve more problems for more people. So we're partnering with companies like DigitalOcean to provide insights into their projects. And then once we provide insights, they can improve their projects to make it easier to onboard contributors. So Hacktoberfest is going to be our sort of, I guess our launch, I guess. I don't know. We're going to launch it like next week, but the URL is insights.opensauce.pizza. And the idea is that you could get insights into like what contributions are happening, as well as find like the list of contributions that's happened too as well. So think of like origin stories, like if you want to find out like where folks came from and how they got involved in the project, or what were good first issues that they had tackled to get started. We'll have that all on platform. Like it's like probably down to 6 months runway. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, this will be a cool tool. Highly recommend once we have login actually working. Would love for people to try it out, give feedback. The focus right now is Hacktoberfest, but we do want to, that redirect is also broken. So lots of broken stuff. We'll be working on the weekend to which I don't recommend everyone work on the weekend. I'm just very excited about this, so I will work on the weekend. But yeah, looking forward to share this and looking forward to empower people to do more contributions in Hacktoberfest.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brian. This is really great. I'm glad that this is recorded because I'm going to go back and watch it again. Lots of really good ideas and knowledge points there. We've got like just two more minutes left. Does anybody have a last minute question? If you can sum up, Brian, maybe the top ways for finding that good first repo, what would you say they are?
Yeah, definitely find that stuff you're using, but find out stuff that supports what you're using. So plugins, extensions, like that's a good first repo because those are usually the first repos ignored in the ecosystem for like React, for Vue. And then for good first issues, if you're a maintainer or you're a contributor, best good first issue is the one you open. So use the stuff, use the product, use the library, use the platform, open issues when you find them. Don't be shy, because when you find issues and tell the maintainer about it, it makes their day because it shows, one, someone's using it, but two, someone cares.
Yeah, I love that. That is so good.
Yeah, great pathway into getting mentorship from that maintainer as well.
Yeah, I love it. So this is really good, I think, both from a contributor's standpoint and a maintainer's standpoint, to just walk through all of the things that you're doing to make it a good experience for all of the contributors is definitely great way to take away improving your repositories for Hacktoberfest, or, supporting new contributors as they come on. Oh, nice. Sharon said he learned a lot about GitHub Actions from your videos. So very cool.
Happy to be helpful.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here at this Lunch and Learn. We're really excited to be kicking off our Preptember monthly challenge. Well, we're in the midst of September 9th already. I'm not sure how that happened. So just a couple more weeks before Hacktoberfest. So definitely check out OpenSauced and everything that's going on there. And you can follow Brian on Twitter at bdougie.io, right? That's it? Put it in the chat. bdougie.io. I'm sorry. I messed it up.
I wanted to say, I created that handle because I wanted to say you could holler at bdougie.io. But I never say that out loud anymore.
Well, you should, because then I would remember it better.
Excellent.
Oh. Well, okay. Again, thanks everyone for being here. And thank you so much, Brian, for giving us this Lunch and Learn so we can learn more about good first repos.
Cool. All right. Cheers, all.